Ever wondered how women proved their virtue in medieval times? Shocked by modern double standards? You won't believe what came before. Number 11. The hot iron test. Could you grab a red-hot piece of metal to prove your innocence? Medieval women did, known as the ordeal by fire. This bizarre test required accused women to carry a heated iron bar for 9 paces. The theory was simple, yet terrifying. God would protect the innocent from burns. After carrying the scorching metal, the woman's hand would be bandaged and examined 3 days later. If the wound was healing cleanly, she was deemed innocent. If it festered, guilt was assumed. This practice spread throughout Europe during the 11th and 12th centuries, with court records describing women undergoing this excruciating test to prove they hadn't committed adultery or practiced witchcraft. Emma of Normandy, accused of being unfaithful to King Aethelred, I of England around 1043, reportedly walked barefoot over 9 red-hot plowshares without injury, thus proving her innocence. Of course, modern historians point out that nobles and well-connected women often had ways to manipulate these tests, while peasant women stood little chance against the searing metal. Court records from Germany and France reveal dozens of cases where women's guilt or innocence hinged entirely on the state of their burns rather than any actual evidence of wrongdoing. Number 10. The wheat bread ordeal. Could a piece of bread tell if you were lying? Medieval authorities thought so. The coarsened or blessed bread and cheese ordeal involved a suspected impure woman trying to swallow a piece of bread consecrated by a priest. If she choked, coughed, or couldn't swallow it, she was considered guilty. The psychological pressure was enormous. Imagine trying to eat while an entire village watches. Knowing your reputation depends on not choking. The test played on the common belief that God would cause physical reactions in the guilty. Records from Anglo-Saxon England described several cases where women accused of sexual impropriety faced the bread ordeal. In one instance, from 1095, a woman named L.G. Fu was forced to undergo this test after being accused of having relations before marriage. When she struggled to swallow the dry bread, she lost her dowry and was publicly humiliated. Meanwhile, her male partner faced no consequences. The dry bread was often made deliberately difficult to swallow, creating a nearly impossible test for nervous women to pass. Number 9. The bleeding test. Did medieval people believe corpses could identify their killers? Absolutely. The beer rite, or cruentation, was a creepy purity test where a suspected woman was forced to touch a murder victim's corpse. If the corpse began to bleed, foam at the mouth, or show other changes, the woman was declared guilty. This macabre practice gained popularity in 13th century Germany and spread throughout Europe, becoming so established that courts sometimes ordered exhumations specifically for this test. In a recorded case from 1533, a woman named Anna was accused of poisoning her husband. When forced to touch his exhumed corpse weeks after burial, witnesses claimed the body bled from the nose. Anna was subsequently burned at the stake. The test reliability was never questioned, despite obvious decomposition processes that could explain such phenomena. The psychological terror of being forced to handle decomposing bodies added another layer of cruelty to an already unjust system. Meanwhile, medical texts from the time show that physicians understood blood could pool and release due to body movement or position changes, knowledge conveniently ignored when prosecuting women. Number 8. The swimming test. Could a woman float her way to innocence? The swimming test, most famously associated with witch trials, actually began as a general purity test for women in the early medieval period. A woman would be bound with ropes and lowered into a body of water. If she floated, she was guilty. If she sank, she was innocent, Although drowning was a distinct possibility, the twisted logic held that water, as God's pure element, would reject an impure woman. In 1219, a noblewoman in northern France underwent this ordeal after being accused of using love potions on her husband. According to court documents, she initially floated before, eventually sinking, creating confusion about her guilt. The judge declared her innocent, likely influenced more by her social status than the test results. The swimming test gained renewed popularity during the witch trial era, when thousands of women faced this impossible choice: drown to prove innocence or float to face execution. Records from German territories show that between 1580 and 1630, over 300 women underwent this ordeal, with the vast majority who survived the dunking subsequently facing execution. Number 7. The Virgin's Wreath Test. Would flowers wilt in your presence? For medieval women, this could spell disaster. The Virgin's Wreath Test involved placing a crown of fresh flowers on a woman's head. If the flowers wilted quickly, she was considered impure. This particularly cruel test was often conducted in public, turning personal matters into community spectacles. The test gained popularity in peasant communities across Eastern Europe, particularly in Poland and Hungary during the 14th century. During spring marriage festivals in rural Hungary, young brides-to-be were subjected to this test before their weddings. Historical accounts describe a 1389 case where a young woman's wreath wilted unusually fast on a hot day. Her wedding was canceled on the spot, and she was forced to pay compensation to the groom's family. The test completely ignored obvious factors like heat, the flower's freshness, or how tightly the wreath was woven. Village records show that women from wealthier families mysteriously passed this test more often, suggesting that bribes to ensure fresher flowers or looser wreaths played a significant role in determining purity. Number 6. The Linen Test. Can a piece of cloth determine your worth? In medieval Italy and France, the proof of the sheet involved displaying blood-stained bedding after a wedding night to prove the bride's virginity. This humiliating practice required family members to inspect the couple's sheets, sometimes in front of witnesses or even entire wedding parties. The absence of blood could lead to the marriage being annulled, the bride being disowned, or severe financial penalties for her family. In 1473, a Venetian merchant's daughter faced disgrace when her wedding sheets showed no blood. Her family was forced to return the entire dowry, and she was sent to a convent. Later investigation revealed she had been born without a hymen, a natural variation in female anatomy completely unknown to medical practitioners of the time. The pressure of this test led to various deceptions, including brides pricking their fingers to stain the sheets or using animal blood. Court records from Florence show several cases where marriages were contested based solely on this unreliable evidence, with women's testimonies about their own bodies completely disregarded. Number 5. The Onion Test. Could an onion reveal your secrets? In parts of medieval Spain and southern France, women accused of impurity underwent the onion ordeal. They were forced to eat raw onions and garlic on empty stomachs, then had their breath checked later. The belief was that sexual activity changed a woman's internal chemistry, affecting how her body processed strong foods. If her breath smelled too strongly, she was considered impure. If it didn't smell enough, she was also considered suspicious. There was no winning. Records from a small town near Barcelona describe a young woman in 1267 who was tested before her wedding because of rumors spread by a rejected suitor. After consuming raw onions, her breath was judged too sweet by the town matrons, leading to her family paying additional dowry as compensation for her supposed impurity. The complete lack of scientific basis didn't stop this test from being applied to countless women, with the subjective nature of smell allowing prejudice to determine outcomes. Those conducting the test could easily declare whatever result aligned with their preconceived notions. Number 4. The chicken test. Would you believe a chicken could determine a woman's purity? In some regions of medieval Germany, a suspected impure woman was required to handle unfertilized eggs that were then incubated. If the eggs failed to hatch, as unfertilized eggs naturally would, she was declared guilty of impurity. This test played on superstitions that a woman's moral state could somehow affect fertility around her. A monastery record from 1342 describes a servant girl accused of relations with a married man. When the eggs she handled failed to produce chickens, she was dismissed without references, effectively ruining her employment prospects. The test was completely rigged from the start, as the chosen eggs were often intentionally collected from hens without roosters. Village witch-finders and local authorities used this test particularly against women who rejected romantic advances or who owned property coveted by others. What's especially disturbing is that educated clergy, who understood basic chicken reproduction, still permitted and sometimes encouraged these tests to control female behavior. Number 3. The bitter water test. Would you drink a mysterious concoction to prove your innocence? The bitter water ordeal, with roots in ancient religious texts, required accused women to drink a mixture of holy water, dirt from the temple floor, and dissolved ink from written curses. The test was administered by priests who told women that if they were guilty, the mixture would cause their thigh to rot and belly to swell. The psychological terror was the real test, as the mixture itself was generally harmless. This ordeal was primarily recorded in Jewish communities throughout medieval Europe, with rabbinical courts conducting the ceremony. Historical texts describe a case from 13th century Germany where a woman named Ruth drank the bitter water after accusations from her husband. When no physical symptoms appeared after several days of observation, her husband was required to apologize publicly and pay a fine to her family. However, many women suffered psychosomatic symptoms due to fear, leading to false confirmations of guilt. The bitter water ordeal was often a last resort when a husband suspected his wife but had no proof, placing one person's jealousy above another's dignity. Number 2. The needle test. Can your body hide the truth? Medieval, wise women and midwives in northern European regions practiced a needling test to determine virginity. They believed a virgin's urine would form certain patterns when dropped onto water with a needle. In some variations, the needle's reaction determined innocence. If it floated, the woman was pure. If it sank, she wasn't. The practice combined superstition with early misunderstandings of female physiology. Court documents from 1398 in what is now Belgium describe a merchant refusing to marry his betrothed after a midwife performed this test and declared the young woman impure. The woman's family appealed to church authorities, who eventually ruled the test invalid, not because it was scientifically nonsensical, but because it was conducted by a woman rather than a church official. The needle test represents how women's bodies were subjected to pseudo-scientific scrutiny, with their life prospects hanging on completely arbitrary outcomes. Interesting to note is that these tests were often administered by other women who had internalized the patriarchal standards of their society, becoming enforcers against their own gender. Number 1. The sleep test. Could your dreams betray you? Perhaps the strangest medieval purity test involved monitoring a woman's sleep. In parts of Italy and Germany, suspected impure women were made to sleep, while witnesses watched for signs of impure dreams, speaking in sleep, certain body movements or facial expressions. Dream interpreters would declare guilt or innocence based on these observations. The practice emerged from the belief that impure thoughts would inevitably manifest during unconscious states. A Florentine diary from 1387 describes a merchant's daughter subjected to this test before an arranged marriage to a wealthy family. 3 elderly women watched her sleep for 3 consecutive nights. When she smiled during her sleep on the second night, they declared she was dreaming of a lover. Her marriage was cancelled, causing significant financial harm to her family. The sleep test was particularly insidious because it was impossible to control one's expressions while unconscious, and interpretation was entirely subjective. Women often reported being unable to sleep at all, knowing they were being watched and judged, with their insomnia then taken as further evidence of a guilty conscience. Are modern society's expectations of women really that different? Has our obsession with judging women's virtue and worth disappeared, or just evolved into new forms